right, we got huge news coming out of Dolton. A federal grand jury has been impaneled to look into corruption by Tiffany Henyard.
Delivered by 4 FBI agents at Dolton Village Hall Friday afternoon. They're directed to the Village of Dolton's custodian of records, a subpoena to testify before a grand jury. And that's our first confirmation that a federal grand jury has been impaneled to investigate allegations of corruption in Dolton.
And let's not forget, her number 2 was just indicted on fraud.
As WGN Investigates was first to report today, a top aide to Dolton Mayor Tiffany Henyard has been indicted for bankruptcy fraud. It comes amid ongoing questions about Henyard's spending and leadership.
Then lastly, the news media just got new credit card receipts showing that Tiffany Henyard and company spent $100,000 traveling lavishly around the country.
Tiffany Henyard is the mayor of Dolton. She is also the supervisor of Thornton Township. Credit card records show Henyard and her team have charged taxpayers more than $102,000 for trips they've taken in the past year. That includes a stay at the Four Seasons in Atlanta and a $13,000 hotel tab in New York City.
All right, let me get you all caught up. Welcome to Dolton, Illinois, where the population is about 20,000 and the median income is about $28,000 a year. Now, the town is run by this woman, Tiffany A. Henyard. Now, she makes about $300,000 a year, split between her 2 jobs as supervisor of Thornton Township and mayor of the Village of Dolton. Now, before she became mayor, she owned a couple of burger joints and she was a trustee for the Village of Dolton. A couple of years before she became mayor, she was also arrested for breaking into cars in Chicago and bonded out on $1,500 bail. Now, I have many videos on Tiffany A. Henyard and her exploits, so I'm not going to go over all of them here. But to give you an idea of who this woman is and how she operates, here are a few examples. Now, Tiffany A. Henyard runs this town like if she is a gangster. Here she is dressed up as crack-dealing gangster Nino Brown, playing Bitch Better Have My Money by Rihanna, telling taxpayers it's time to pay their money.
And I'm looking for that Rihanna. That's what I'm looking for. This is what they told me to tell y'all right here. Every single resident. Pay me what you owe me. Thank you, DJ.
Now, the big issue that's been going on is that Tiffany A. Henyard has been spending the town's money like crazy, putting them in a $7 million budget deficit. And remember, she's also the supervisor at Thornton Township, and they have a $5 million budget deficit. So now, the big issue is transparency. See, the super mayor doesn't want to show anyone how she's spending money. She's essentially keeping it a secret, to the point where the trustees had to sue the super mayor in court to figure out how the money was being spent and even how much money was left.
This is not a dictatorship, and that's the problem that we're having.
Dolton trustee Brittany Norwood says she and many of her fellow village trustees have been fighting to save Dolton.
I am your leader.
They say Mayor Tiffany Henyard is preventing them from doing their jobs and is also blocking them from seeing any of the village spending.
We're asking for credit card statements, we're asking for bank statements, and we're asking for information that help us, assist us as trustees to know how the money is being spent.
Trustee Norwood says some trustees were locked out of the village's finances when they discovered in September that Dolton was $7 million in debt.
We're able to track receipts for spending, and then we shared it with the public, and once we started sharing it with the public, our access was denied.
So now this brings us to Keith Freeman. If Super Mayor Tiffany Henyard is Batman, then Keith Freeman is Robin. Now, remember when we talked about Tiffany Henyard having 2 positions, one at Dolton and one at Thornton Township? Well, Keith Freeman also holds 2 positions, one at Dolton as Tiffany Henyard's right-hand man, and also one at Thornton Township as, again, Tiffany Henyard's right-hand man. Keith Freeman is so entwined with Tiffany Henyard, he actually runs her charity, the Tiffany Cares charity.
There's no foundation in the state of Illinois moving like we moving and shaking and grooving like we doing. Right? That's right.
Henyard mixes her 2 taxpayer-funded jobs and charity work.
Anybody else after them? That's it.
That's Keith Freeman sitting next to her at a Dolton meeting where he's the village administrator. Freeman is also an advisor to Thornton Township. and he's the guy listed as the registered agent of Tiffany Henyard's foundation.
Now, Tiffany Henyard funneled tens of thousands of dollars into this charity from both Dolton and Thornton Township.
Chris Gonzalez is the last surviving critic of Henyard on the Thornton Township board. He and other critics say public money has been used to fund Henyard's private charity. They say board members were asked to approve a $10,000 payment to the foundation in 2022, days before a much publicized cancer walk from Dolton to Springfield. Thornton Township credit card records show taxpayers then footed the bill for more than $10,000 in hotel rooms along the route.
I saw the video. Township vehicles being used, township employees being used. Once again, were they paid? Were they given comp time or things of that nature? So there's just, unfortunately, there's a long list. Hotel use, meals.
Now, because no one knew how the money was being spent, the Attorney General's office took the extraordinary step of ordering the charity to stop accepting any funds.
The Attorney General has ordered the foundation to stop soliciting money because it still hasn't submitted tax filings to show how it spent money.
So now, just to recap, Keith Freeman is Tiffany Henyard's number 2 in Dolton. He's also her number 2 in Thornton Township, and he also runs her charity, which is under investigation by the state. So now, when it came over the news that Keith Freeman was under indictment for bankruptcy fraud, things kind of went crazy.
A high-ranking administrator for both Dolton and Thornton Township is charged with fraud connected to an alleged bankruptcy scheme.
The village also completed negotiations with the police patrol, police lieutenants, and the sergeants.
Right here you see Keith Freeman, who sits next to embattled Dolton Mayor Tiffany Henyard, discussing finances at a recent village board meeting. The U.S. attorney accuses Freeman of concealing assets and incomes from his creditors. He faces up to 5 years in prison if convicted. We reached out to Freeman and various Dolton officials, but have not yet heard back.
Now, the indictment sheds light on Keith Freeman's checkered past. As an example, Keith Freeman worked as the village administrator for the village of Robbins, which is 15 minutes from Dolton. Allegedly, he received $90,000 in excess of his authorized salary, and the village of Robbins had a claim against him and wanted him to pay them back that $90,000. Then in the indictment, the government lists all of Keith Freeman's lies that he listed on his bankruptcy filing. Here are the list of lies listed in the indictment. Allegedly, he lied to the government when he said he wasn't the village administrator of Dolton. He lied when he said he wasn't getting an annual income from Dolton of $100,000. He also lied when he said he didn't own this company, Government Staffing Incorporated. He lied when he created that fake bank account to dump the Dolton money in so the authorities wouldn't have it. He also lied about the village of Robbins' excess salary money that he owed to them. So with all of this evidence, they indicted him for bankruptcy fraud.
As part of a personal bankruptcy case, he was required to report his earnings. But this indictment on one count of bankruptcy fraud says Freeman falsely stated he only worked for the township and made just over $99,000 last year. Prosecutors say he tried to hide his Dolton earnings via a pass-through company, which brought his income to $195,000 last year. They further allege the village of Robbins has a claim against Freeman for more than $90,000 he took without authorization from a previous post he held as village administrator there.
So it looks like Keith Freeman may not be a free man for long. See, now let me give you some insight on how the FBI generally runs its business. All right, so the FBI loves to find the weakest link, someone who they can push their buttons, getting them to flip on the higher ups. And here, Keith Freeman looks like a very easy button to push. In Keith Freeman's case, he was lying about things that were easy to verify, like you work for the city of Dolton. Matter of fact, you're literally sitting up there every week next to Tiffany Henyard saying that you work for Dolton. So now, surprise, surprise, he gets indicted, and then a couple of days later, a grand jury issued subpoenas to the village of Dolton.
And we are following breaking news out of Dolton, the FBI serving subpoenas. Thank you for joining us at 5. I'm Dawn Hasbrook.
I'm Scott Schneider. We want to start with breaking news tonight. The FBI, as Dawn just mentioned, serving subpoenas in Dolton.
Let's get right to Elizabeth Matthews at the Village Hall, where 4 agents were this afternoon. Elizabeth.
Scott and Don, it is all quiet now, but here's what Fox 32 has learned. We've learned that those 4 federal agents paid a visit here at the Dolton Village Hall around 2:40 this afternoon. They were serving, like you mentioned, 2 subpoenas. Take a look at some of this amateur video that was sent in to our news station by a Fox 32 viewer. It appears to show a couple of those federal agents inside Village Hall.
Now, the first subpoena is going to the custodian of records, which under village law is the clerk. But the clerk, as you know, hasn't been able to get records. So whoever now is a custodian of records, who actually has the records, is now going to have to answer the subpoena and go in front of the grand jury and testify.
They're directed to the Village of Dolton's custodian of records, a to testify before a grand jury. And that's our first confirmation that a federal grand jury has been impaneled to investigate allegations of corruption in Dolton.
Now that we know a grand jury has issued these subpoenas, it's interesting what they're looking for. Now, they've asked for a list of employment records for 28 people in this subpoena. Now, those 28 people are all people loyal to Tiffany Henyard.
One subpoena asked for the personnel and disciplinary files for 29 Dolton employees. Trustee Brown reviewed the names and told us they all have one thing in common.
All of these people are loyal to the mayor. Every last one of them are loyal to the mayor.
Now, this brings us back to Officer Terry Young. Remember Terry Young? So, for those of you who don't remember, in a 2-week period, 2 weeks, there are only 336 hours in a 2-week period. That's 24 hours a day times 7 days a week. Simple math. But Officer Terry Young, he got paid for 303 hours in a 2-week period. It's really impossible.
The officers are paid every 2 weeks, which without overtime is 80 hours. But when they're put on Henyard's detail, that 80 hours balloons to well over 100 hours, sometimes 200 hours. And in the case of Officer Terry Young last May, 303 hours worked over a 2-week period. That resulted in a single paycheck of more than $13,000.
How does a person put in a 2-week pay period, 303 hours? That's impossible. That's impossible.
336
Does he never go to sleep?
In fact, there are 336 hours total in 2 weeks, meaning Young was not being paid for only 33 hours over that period.
Now, to anyone else, that looks like fraud, and it seems like since he's loyal to the mayor and they're asking for these records, this may be some of the records that the FBI and the federal grand jury are interested in. Now, the second subpoena actually requests information about Keith Freeman. Remember the guy who was lying on the bankruptcy forms? Well, he had a whole bunch of shell companies, and they want to know if any of his shell companies were getting paid by Dolton.
The second subpoena asks for information about village administrator Keith Freeman, Mayor Henyard's top deputy, including payments, tax records, and any contracts given to a list of companies, some of which are associated with Freeman, according to a search of LLC records.
Now, we know from Keith Freeman's indictment, he's affiliated with multiple companies, including the Government Staffing Advisors, Inc., and he's the owner of Keith Freeman, LLC, doing business as Doodad's Novelty Store. We also know that Village of Robbins filed a claim against him for unauthorized payments, and he received something like $90,000 above his salary, which he has to pay back to the Village of Robbins. And now some village credit cards have been released through a FOIA request, and those receipts show that the mayor, who's only making $50,000 a year, has racked up over $100,000 on the village credit card.
FBI agents arrived at Village Hall on Friday to serve subpoenas for the employment records of more than a dozen Dolton employees. Tiffany Henyard is the mayor of Dolton. She is also the supervisor of Thornton Township. Credit card records show Henyard and her team have charged taxpayers more than $102,000 for trips they've taken in the past year. That includes a stay at the Four Seasons in Atlanta and a $13,000 hotel tab in New York City. Township taxpayers also paid for a trip to Las Vegas. Henyard's team has refused to say how all the travel benefited residents.
So, at the end of the day, what do you need to take away from this video? Well, one, Keith Freeman seems to be a huge dum-dum who didn't think that him sitting up there at every village hall meeting next to the mayor saying that he's making $100,000 a year and working for the village, the FBI was just going to not notice that. This is the person Tiffany Henyard has running both Thornton Township and the Village of Dolton. So that's scary in of itself. The second thing is that this is a grand jury investigation. So that means we have a grand jury looking into criminal wrongdoing. And when grand juries definitely get impaneled, they generally hand out indictments. Now, was Keith Freeman's indictment from this same grand jury? I am not sure, but I would not be surprised if it's all part of the larger scheme. And also think about this, people. Those 28 people who are loyal to Henyard, who the FBI has gotten their entire employment records from, the city of Dolton, is going to be scary for anyone whose name is on that list. There were police officers' names on that list and other officials. Keith Freeman's name was on that list. That is not a list you want to be on. All right, as always, tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section. Tell me, how long do you think it's going to take for Henyard to get arrested if the FBI finds something? Right now, grand jury subpoenas are going out. One person's already been indicted. I'm thinking 6 to 8 months before we really get something substantive on this Henyard thing, because it seems like things are moving fast. And when you got 28 people whose names are now in the FBI database and the FBI wants to know more about them, I think the fish are about to flip. But we will see. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe to all that great YouTube stuff. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.